For nearly 5,000 years, we've been fed a story so clean, so convenient, it's almost insulting. That a tomb, rising 480 feet above the desert, was built by men with ropes, copper tools, and faith. But what if it wasn't a tomb? What if it wasn't even Egyptian? Beneath the sand and silence lies something else. Evidence ignored, questions silenced, chambers sealed tight, not by stone, but by fear. This isn't about aliens. It's about control, about the quiet war for history itself. The Great Pyramid wasn't just built. It was buried, twice. First by time, then by those who never wanted you to ask the question we're about to ask. Who really built the pyramids? For generations, we've accepted a version of history that fits neatly into textbooks. That the Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2550 BC by Pharaoh Khufu as an elaborate tomb. It's a story repeated so often it's taken as fact, taught in schools, recited in documentaries, etched into museum plaques. Thousands of workers, copper chisels, sleds, ropes, and 2 decades of labor. That's all it took, they say. But dig just beneath that surface, and the narrative begins to crumble. The oldest and largest of Egypt's pyramids, constructed with uncanny precision and staggering scale, bears almost no direct evidence linking it to Khufu. There are no inscriptions dedicating the structure to him, no ceremonial texts, no ornate burial goods, and most disturbingly, no body. Strangely, this massive monument, eclipsing anything else in the ancient world, is devoid of the basic elements found in nearly every royal Egyptian tomb. In other tombs, kings were entombed with jewelry, tools, sacred texts, and elaborate hieroglyphs celebrating their journey to the afterlife. Khufu's supposed final resting place? Cold, silent granite. A box without markings, no gold, no bones, no tribute to the divine ruler. And yet, Egyptologists still claim with confidence, this was his tomb. They cite one piece of evidence, a faint red ochre inscription discovered in a hidden chamber far above the king's chamber. But this so-called proof surfaced only in the 1800s, long after looters and explorers had already left their mark. The location, difficult to access and easy to forge. And the man who found it? Colonel Howard Vyse, an ambitious British explorer under pressure to produce results. He had motive, he had opportunity, and he had access to gunpowder. The idea that this one graffitied name, Khufu, is enough to assign authorship to the entire pyramid is not just flimsy, it's desperate. If this were a courtroom, such evidence wouldn't hold. So why does academia cling to it so fiercely? Because the alternative is terrifying. That we don't actually know who built the Great Pyramid or how. And if we don't know that, what else don't we know? It's not just the absence of evidence that's troubling. It's the silence. The eerie, calculated silence from a civilization that documented everything from grain deliveries to bowel movements. How is it that the single most ambitious architectural feat of the ancient world gets no mention? No construction record, no commemoration, no eyewitness account, not even a myth. We've romanticized the idea of pyramid building, long lines of slaves pulling ropes under the desert sun. But archaeological evidence contradicts the slave narrative. These workers were fed, housed, and respected. They weren't expendable labor. They were skilled. Which raises another question. What kind of skill was required? And why does it seem to vanish after the 4th dynasty? Later pyramids are sloppy, crumbling, far inferior. It's as if whoever built the Great Pyramid disappeared, or stopped building, or wasn't even Egyptian to begin with. This single structure, completely out of context, unmatched in quality, and isolated in purpose, stands like a fingerprint with no hand. The mystery is not just who built it, but why we've been so willing to believe a story held together by threads and chalk. Mainstream Egyptology has long resisted alternative interpretations, not because the evidence is solid, but because the official story has become too convenient to challenge. It provides a tidy beginning, a patriotic origin, and a clear protagonist, Khufu. But the moment we question this foundation, the entire timeline of human civilization begins to tilt. If Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid, then either someone before him did, or someone outside of history altogether. It's not just about stones and dynasties. It's about control. Who owns the past? Who decides which version gets taught, televised, or dismissed? In the case of Egypt, the gatekeeper has a name: Dr. Zahi Hawass, a man with political power, global influence, and an unshakable grip on the archaeological narrative. Hawass has made a career out of promoting Egypt's grandeur, while quietly suffocating any theory that strays too far from the textbook. Time and again, independent researchers have attempted to gain access to restricted areas inside the pyramids, only to be blocked without explanation. From sealed chambers to unfinished investigations, the trail of obstruction is as long as the corridors of the monument itself. Take the discovery of mysterious air shafts in the Queen's Chamber. When German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a robotic camera through one of them in 1993, it found something astonishing. A small limestone door fitted with copper handles, an anomaly never seen before in Egyptian architecture. Just as Gantenbrink was preparing to continue his exploration, the Egyptian Antiquities Organization shut him down. Years passed. Then in 2002, a different team drilled through the first door, only to find a second sealed slab behind it. And there, the effort stopped. No further exploration, no justification, just silence. And yet, that silence is loud. What exactly is behind those doors? What are we not supposed to see? The official reason is preservation. But preservation of what? The stone or the illusion? Modern scanning techniques have already revealed a massive void above the Grand Gallery, confirmed by multiple independent teams using muon radiography. The space is large enough to house an aircraft. But to this day, it remains unexplored. No probes, no excavation, no answers. The lack of curiosity is unnatural. In any other field, such findings would spark global interest. In Egyptology, they provoke defensiveness, even hostility. It's as if admitting there's something unexplained would unravel decades of institutional certainty. Meanwhile, the deeper questions go unasked. Why would Khufu build a pyramid that bears no resemblance to the burial practices of his time? Why would he leave it unmarked, undecorated, uninhabited? Why would the engineering suddenly decline after his reign, never to be replicated again? It's not just historians who struggle with these contradictions. It's engineers, architects, geologists, people who work with physical reality, not cultural pride. They see it for what it is: a structure out of time, out of place, and possibly out of reach for the civilization to which it's been credited. When facts are inconvenient, institutions bury them, but the stones do not lie. They stand, silent, seamless, and waiting. The truth about who built the Great Pyramid may not be lost. It may simply be locked behind doors no one is allowed to open. The deeper you venture into the Great Pyramid, the less it resembles a royal tomb, and the more it begins to look like a machine, an artifact of engineering rather than ceremony. Inside the king's chamber lie massive granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons, quarried from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. Transporting them would be a logistical nightmare today, even with cranes and trucks. But the real mystery isn't how they were moved. It's how they were cut. The surfaces of these blocks show characteristics that cannot be reproduced by hand tools. Flatness within thousandths of an inch, mirror finishes, and drill holes perfectly cylindrical, with concentric spiral striations. These are not the byproducts of pounding with rocks. These are machining marks. Precision work, industrial-level precision, done over 4,000 years ago. Engineer Christopher Dunn spent decades analyzing the interiors of the pyramid and concluded that many of the granite surfaces bear signs of high-speed drilling. Not speculative, not suggestive. Measured, documented. He examined the curvature of drill cores extracted from stone and noted patterns consistent with modern power tools. Tools which, by all conventional accounts, should not have existed in the ancient world. When experimental archaeologists tried to replicate these cuts using copper chisels and sand, they failed miserably. The tools wore down within minutes. The stone barely yielded. The progress was so slow, it bordered on symbolic. At that rate, carving just one block would take years, let alone the millions needed to complete the pyramid. Even more baffling are the saw marks found on some granite beams. Multiple parallel cuts, perfectly spaced, suggesting a machine blade with uniform tooth pressure, not the erratic gouging of manual labor. These are not the remnants of guesswork or brute force. They are deliberate, mathematical, as if someone had a blueprint, as if someone understood not only how to cut granite, but how to control resonance, vibration, and load-bearing stress at a structural level. We're only beginning to model today. The king's chamber itself is positioned with such geometrical precision that even minor shifts in orientation would compromise its acoustic properties. Yes, acoustic. The chamber resonates. It hums at a frequency measurable by modern instruments. That's not a coincidence. It's design, and design implies purpose. But what purpose? That's the question scholars rarely ask. Because to ask it is to accept that the structure might not be a tomb at all, but a device. One meant to do something. Generate, resonate, store, or transmit. These are not ideas born from fantasy. They arise from stone, symmetry, and silence. The physical evidence refuses to behave like a funerary monument. And yet the funerary explanation persists, clung to not because it makes sense, but because it fits a narrative. The problem is, stone doesn't care about narrative. It speaks its own language. And the language of the Great Pyramid is telling a very different story, one carved into granite, polished without fire, and built not by slaves, but by savants of a forgotten order. Mainstream Egyptologists often respond to these engineering anomalies with dismissive shrugs or evasive answers. They attribute the granite cuts to patient craftsmanship or abrasive sand techniques, as if centuries of human persistence could account for the kind of precision that modern CNC machines still struggle to match. But this explanation doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Patience doesn't produce microscopic symmetry. Sweat doesn't generate uniform boreholes with spiraling grooves. Time doesn't make tools more effective than physics allows. And yet, the dominant narrative insists that all of this, the cutting, the transporting, the lifting, the alignment, was achieved without electricity, without steel, and without plans. Just intuition, faith, and copper chisels. Let's put this into perspective. Granite ranks about 6 to 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. Copper ranks barely third. This isn't a minor gap. It's the difference between trying to cut a diamond with a fingernail. The abrasives needed to shape granite effectively would have to be harder than the granite itself. materials like corundum or diamond, neither of which have been found in Egypt's toolkits from that period. Furthermore, the volume of granite used in the king's chamber and relieving chambers above, it defies the logic of tomb construction. Why employ the hardest, heaviest material, transported from hundreds of miles away, for a space meant solely to house a dead body? If Khufu was trying to impress the gods, why not decorate it? Why not inscribe a single spell, name, or glyph on its perfectly square walls? Instead, what we find is emptiness. Monumental, echoing emptiness. And within that silence, anomalies multiply. Some granite blocks are not just cut. They're interlocked with joins so tight that a razor blade can't slip between them. No mortar, no error. This is craftsmanship on a level we cannot reproduce with manual labor alone. And that fact should stop us in our tracks. But instead, it's swept aside, dismissed as advanced for their time. What does that even mean? Either they had the tools, or they didn't. Either they knew the geometry, or they guessed and somehow achieved millimeter perfection by accident. Some argue that we underestimate ancient ingenuity. That's fair. But there's a line between admiration and delusion. The builders of the Great Pyramid were not crude masons fumbling with hand tools. They were engineers, perhaps the most advanced of their time, or of any time. If the evidence inside the pyramid is accurate, and it hasn't been faked, forged, or misunderstood, then we're looking at a project that required technology beyond what was available in 2500 BC. And that leaves us with a sobering possibility. Either history is missing an entire chapter of lost knowledge, or the pyramid builders were someone else entirely. Someone forgotten, someone erased. Because what's buried under Giza isn't just stone. It's contradiction, silence, and something we no longer understand. Step inside the Great Pyramid, and you enter a realm of perpetual shadow. No windows, no skylights, no torches lining the walls. Just narrow passages and chambers carved deep within millions of tons of limestone and granite. And yet, to build it, someone had to see. Someone had to navigate long, winding corridors and align massive blocks with uncanny precision. According to standard history, ancient workers used oil lamps and torches to light their way. But there's a problem, a big one. There's no soot, no smoke residue, no burn marks, no trace of flame. The walls and ceilings, even in the deepest parts of the pyramid, are clean, impossibly clean. And that absence isn't trivial. It's a forensic fingerprint pointing toward a question no one wants to ask. If they didn't use fire, what did they use? It's not a casual oversight. In every other tomb across Egypt, no matter how small or remote, there's soot, burn stains, blackening from centuries of torches. But not here. Not in the most complex structure of them all. Some have proposed they used mirrors to bounce sunlight deep into the corridors. The theory sounds clever until you test it. Mirrors from that era were made of polished bronze, barely reflective, and light degrades rapidly with each bounce. Even with modern mirrors, light couldn't reach more than a few dozen meters. The inner sanctums of the pyramid are hundreds of feet from any entrance. No mirror system could carry light that far with useful intensity. Others suggest workers simply memorized layouts and worked in darkness. But the precision of the cuts, the complexity of internal design, and the need for visual alignment make this implausible at best. Then comes the more controversial hypothesis that some form of non-combustion lighting existed. Ancient electric lamps, chemical illumination, piezoelectric reactions. At first, it sounds absurd, pseudo-history. But absence of evidence where we'd expect overwhelming presence is evidence of absence. And it demands exploration. Because the question remains unanswered. How did they see? If the builders had access to some form of advanced, smokeless light source, even rudimentary by today's standards, it would rewrite everything we think we know about ancient technology. It wouldn't require lasers or fusion, just something beyond open flame, something deliberate, something lost. Ancient texts from other cultures hint at such possibilities. The Indian Vedas speak of eternal lamps in temple sanctuaries. Roman historian Plutarch describes lamps in Egyptian tombs that burned without oil and never extinguished. Could these be legends rooted in forgotten science? The mainstream answer is predictable: myth, metaphor, misinterpretation. But those same sources are used without question when they support the official narrative. The inconsistency is telling. We accept mythology as metaphor when it suits us, and dismiss it as fantasy when it doesn't. The problem isn't that the ancients lacked technology. It's that we lack imagination. And the pyramid's unburned walls whisper of a technology we no longer understand. Or perhaps were never meant to. The silence of sootless ceilings raises more than technical questions. It challenges the entire psychology of our assumptions. If the ancient Egyptians could see inside the pyramid without fire, then they possessed a level of understanding we've chosen not to recognize. The conventional explanation, rooted in the limitations of Bronze Age technology, can't reconcile with the physical evidence. And so the silence is ignored. Or worse, it's rationalized away. Egyptologists point to ceremonial purposes, saying perhaps the pyramid wasn't built to be accessed during construction. But the architecture tells another story. These corridors and chambers weren't symbolic. They were used. The stress-relieving chambers above the king's chamber, the precision of the alignment, the effort required to carve such narrow tunnels, all suggest a structure meant to be entered, observed, and maintained. Which brings us back to the core question: observed by whom, and under what light? In 2017, an experiment at the University of Illinois attempted to recreate ancient lighting conditions using torches in sealed chambers built to pyramid dimensions. The result? Smoke built up within minutes. Visibility dropped to near zero. Respiratory conditions became hazardous. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was unworkable. And yet the builders of the Great Pyramid didn't just survive in those corridors, they thrived. They shaped, aligned, placed, and sealed with sub-millimeter precision. They needed clarity. They needed control. They needed light. So either our understanding of their capabilities is catastrophically flawed, or they weren't the builders at all. Perhaps they were the inheritors. There's a pattern in archaeology, one that repeats across continents and cultures. The older a structure is, the more complex and precise it becomes. Later attempts to replicate it fail badly. In Egypt, this is seen in the decline of pyramid quality after the 4th dynasty. In South America, it's visible in the difference between Incan and pre-Incan stonework. In Mesopotamia, megalithic temples precede cities. This suggests not progress, but regression, a loss, not of faith, but of knowledge. And in that context, the lighting mystery becomes more than a footnote. It becomes a clue, one that points to a civilization not just older, but different. A culture that didn't evolve linearly from crude to refined, but one that arrived fully formed, then vanished. We don't like that idea, because it doesn't fit the evolutionary model of civilization we've come to trust. It implies catastrophe, amnesia, perhaps even design. So instead, we avoid it. We say coincidence, anomaly, unexplained, and we move on. But the sootless chambers of the Great Pyramid do not move on. They remain, waiting. And perhaps that's the lesson. The truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it lingers in shadows, invisible not because it's hidden, but because no one dares shine a light. The pyramid is not a riddle to be solved. It is a mirror held up to our arrogance, a question we haven't yet earned the right to answer. In the story of Egypt's past, there is one man whose name recurs not as a witness, but as a gatekeeper. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the former Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, is more than a scholar. He is a brand, a voice, a barricade. For decades, he's shaped the public narrative of ancient Egypt, deciding not only what gets excavated, but what gets announced. He appears in documentaries, lectures, and press conferences, always with the same message. Egypt's history is known, established, and complete. But behind that message lies a darker reality, one of suppression, restriction, and silence. Researchers across the globe have reported being denied permits, access, and even data when their findings diverge from the official story. And that story, more often than not, is Hawass's. He claims to be protecting Egypt's heritage from sensationalism. But the evidence suggests he's protecting something else: control. When German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink discovered a mysterious sealed door inside the Queen's chamber shaft in 1993, he was abruptly shut down. His project halted, his access revoked. The justification? Bureaucratic concerns. But the timing was too precise. Just when the probe revealed something unprecedented, copper-handled doors, perfectly cut limestone, a sealed chamber never before opened. The exploration ended, and for nearly a decade, no one was allowed back in. When a new team finally resumed the work in 2002, they drilled through the first door, only to find another, equally sealed, behind it. Once again, the project stopped. No camera sent through, no excavation, just silence wrapped in limestone. Why the hesitation? Why the fear of what might lie beyond? Hawass has offered no clear answer. Instead, he deflects, laughs off suggestions, or labels alternative researchers as pyramidiates. His disdain for theories outside the academic consensus is legendary. When independent geologist Robert Schoch presented evidence that the Sphinx's erosion patterns were caused by heavy rainfall, implying the monument could be over 12,000 years old, Hawass didn't debate the data. He stormed out of the room, walked away from cameras, shut down discussion. That's not science. That's censorship. And in a field supposedly dedicated to uncovering truth, censorship is treason. It's not that Hawass hasn't made contributions. He has. His charisma brought global attention to Egyptology. His efforts raised funding, tourism, and institutional pride. But power, unchecked, mutates. It stops being stewardship and becomes gatekeeping. And the more questions that pile up, the sealed doors, the muon-scan voids, the lack of exploration, the more it seems that Hawass isn't guarding artifacts. He's guarding narratives. He decides what's real, what's worthy, what's permitted, and what must remain buried. And in doing so, he doesn't protect Egypt's past. He distorts it. The danger isn't in wild theories. The danger is when one man gets to choose which questions are allowed to exist. Control of narrative isn't just about prestige, it's about protection. If the history of ancient Egypt were ever seriously rewritten, it would destabilize more than textbooks. It would shake museum collections, dismantle doctoral theses, and challenge national identity itself. Egypt's past is its pride, its diplomacy, its economy. To suggest that its greatest monuments might not be the sole achievement of pharaonic civilization is to flirt with sacrilege. And Hawass knows this. That's why he guards the past like a fortress, denying not only theories, but access. Physical, academic, institutional. He's denied Graham Hancock filming rights, blocked Robert Bauval from sites, and called credentialed scientists frauds for proposing evidence-based alternatives. This isn't skepticism. It's authoritarianism wrapped in scholarship. Take the 2017 Muon scan, a non-invasive physics-based study conducted by a team of international scientists. They discovered a massive void above the Grand Gallery. Not a crack, not a pocket, a chamber large enough to rival the king's chamber in size. Its position unexplained, its purpose unknown. The response from Egyptian authorities? Dismissal. Not inquiry, not collaboration. Just bureaucratic stonewalling. Hawass brushed it off as irrelevant. But science doesn't lie. The scans were peer-reviewed. The chamber is there. And yet, it remains untouched. Because if they go in and find something, they lose control. And control, in this game, is everything. Why does this matter? Because when truth becomes a threat, it becomes the first casualty. Real archaeology should be fearless, not filtered. It should welcome anomalies, not bury them. But in Egypt, anomalies are threats to the throne of accepted history. And those who challenge it are punished, not with prison, but with silence. Revoked permits, career sabotage, reputation smears. This isn't academic rigor, it's academic theater. A performance designed to reassure the public that the past is already known. But it isn't. It never was. The pyramid doesn't fit the story. The tools don't match the cuts. The chambers don't match the purpose. The erosion doesn't match the timeline. The evidence screams, but the institutions cover their ears. Hawass may genuinely believe he's protecting something sacred, but belief is not fact, and authority is not truth. When one person decides what can and cannot be explored, the pursuit of knowledge dies. Egypt's sands may still hold answers, but not while its gates are locked. The sealed doors inside the pyramid are more than physical barriers. They're symbolic, representing not just what we haven't found, but what we're not allowed to look for. And so the pyramid waits, not just for tools or science, but for courage. The courage to confront a history not controlled, not curated, but raw and unfiltered. A history Hawass cannot protect forever. In 1993, a small robotic probe named Upuaut 2 crept inside a narrow shaft of the Great Pyramid's Queen's Chamber and sent back images that shocked the archaeological world. At the controls was German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink, who had spent years designing a device to navigate the tight, unexplored channels hidden deep within the monument. What he discovered was unprecedented. A small limestone door, sealed tight and fitted with 2 copper handles, something never seen before in Egyptian architecture. It wasn't a blocked shaft or debris. It was deliberate, crafted, purposeful. And just like that, the shaft's symbolic explanation collapsed. This wasn't metaphor. It was a sealed mechanism, leading somewhere or protecting something. And yet, almost as quickly as the discovery made headlines, the project was halted. Gantenbrink was dismissed. The Egyptian authorities, under the direction of Zahi Hawass, revoked further access. No justification, no peer review, no invitation for collaboration, just silence. Years passed. Then in 2002, a team funded by National Geographic was granted limited access to drill a hole through the mysterious limestone slab. What they found behind it was even stranger. Another sealed door. No chamber, no passage. Just a second barrier, perfectly positioned and equally impenetrable. And again, exploration stopped. No cameras were sent beyond. No follow-up mission was approved, no answers given. The media reported it briefly, then moved on. And the twin doors, what some now call Gantenbrink's door and its twin, remain undisturbed to this day. Why? What's behind them? And more importantly, what are we not supposed to find? These aren't speculative questions. They are engineering questions, architectural questions, historical questions. Because the presence of these sealed doors, hidden deep within a shaft, once thought to be symbolic, changes everything. It suggests internal design far more sophisticated than ceremonial airflow. It suggests security, concealment, intention. And yet, Hawass and the Egyptian Antiquities Organization have resisted every call to continue the investigation. Their reasoning? Vague concerns about damaging the pyramid's integrity. But tiny fiber optic cameras don't harm stone. Micro drones don't destroy chambers. What they might destroy, however, is the story. Because if something lies beyond those doors, something anomalous, un-Egyptian, or impossibly old, the narrative collapses. Even more mysterious is the fact that no similar doors have ever been found in other pyramids. Not in Saqqara, not in Dashur, not in the dozens of lesser tombs that dot the Egyptian landscape. This feature is unique to the Great Pyramid, and it's not alone. Multiple shafts, sealed passageways, and voids remain unexamined. Not because we lack the tools, but because we lack the permission. The technology exists. We can map entire cities underground. We can scan solid rock with muons and radar. But inside the most famous monument on Earth, we stop short every time, just before the threshold. As if something, someone, doesn't want us to cross. In 2017, a team of international scientists used a groundbreaking technique known as muon radiography, essentially cosmic ray scanning, to peer deep inside the Great Pyramid without physically disturbing it. What they found stunned the scientific community. An enormous void located above the Grand Gallery. A space so large it rivaled the King's Chamber, completely hidden from view, with no apparent entrance or exit. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't wishful thinking. The data was peer-reviewed and confirmed across multiple independent studies. The chamber is real. And yet, to this day, it has not been explored. No probes, no endoscopic cameras, no robots. Just another dead end. Deliberate, frustrating, and familiar. Once again, permission was denied. And once again, the silence was louder than the discovery itself. Egyptian authorities dismissed the void as irrelevant, labeling it just a structural feature without evidence. But architects and engineers disagree. Its size, position, and isolation suggest intentional design, not accident. It sits above one of the most meticulously constructed spaces in the pyramid, where acoustics, weight distribution, and vibration harmonics converge. That isn't random. That's architecture. More importantly, it challenges the tomb theory entirely. If the pyramid was simply a burial structure, why hide entire chambers? Why construct sealed shafts and voids with no ceremonial purpose? The design doesn't reflect reverence, it reflects engineering, control, function, and that distinction changes everything. Let's remember, nothing like this has ever been found in any other known tomb. No secondary chambers without decoration, no dual-door sealed shafts, no mysterious voids detectable only through subatomic particles. These features aren't just anomalies. They're fingerprints, evidence of an unknown logic, a different objective. And still, the archaeological establishment refuses to ask the obvious question: what were these features for? because to ask it is to risk confronting a purpose that defies everything we think we know about ancient Egypt. A purpose not of death, but of power, of resonance, of memory, perhaps even of technology. Even the tools used to seal these doors raise questions. The copper handles embedded into the limestone, materials never found in comparable contexts, suggest functionality. Were they used to open and close something? To conduct something? To signal something? The answers may lie just inches beyond those slabs. But no one is allowed to look. And that's no longer science. That's dogma. When curiosity is punished and exploration is forbidden. We are no longer dealing with the past. We're dealing with politics. The Great Pyramid has become a fortress of omission, and its greatest mysteries remain locked behind doors that no one dares open. In the end, it isn't the unknown that's most disturbing. It's the institutional unwillingness to confront it. Gantenbrink's door, the second sealed slab, the muon-scanned void. These aren't myths or exaggerations. They're data points. Physical, measurable, undeniable. And yet, they remain unexplored. Not because we can't, but because someone won't let us. The greatest cover-up in ancient history may not be what lies buried in the sand, but what's intentionally left untouched in plain sight. The pyramid is no longer hiding its secrets. We are choosing not to see them. In the 1990s, author and researcher Robert Bauval introduced a theory that sent shockwaves through the archaeological world: the Orion correlation theory. It proposed that the three pyramids of Giza were not randomly placed, but aligned with uncanny precision to mirror the three stars of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. At first glance, it seemed like a poetic coincidence. But when the alignments were analyzed with astronomical software and historical sky charts, something astonishing emerged. The configuration matched not the sky of Khufu's era, but that of 10,500 BC, thousands of years before the dawn of pharaonic Egypt. This wasn't artistic license. It was geometry, astronomy, and architecture working in synchrony, on a scale modern engineers still struggle to replicate. The implications were profound. If the pyramids were aligned to Orion as it appeared over 12,000 years ago, then either their builders had a knowledge of precessional astronomy centuries ahead of known civilizations, or the structures themselves were built far earlier than recorded history admits. Mainstream Egyptology dismissed the theory as speculative. But the evidence refused to go away. The layout of the Giza Plateau not only mimics Orion's belt in spacing and angle, it does so in proportion and orientation to the Nile River, which mirrors the celestial Milky Way. In short, the Earth itself had been used as a canvas for star mapping, not metaphorically, literally. Why Orion? In ancient Egyptian mythology, Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of the afterlife, resurrection, and cosmic order. This wasn't casual symbolism. It was foundational to their belief system. The soul of the pharaoh was believed to ascend to the stars, specifically to Orion, to join the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. But the precision of the alignment suggests something more than theology. It suggests intent, planning, knowledge of Earth's axial precession, a phenomenon requiring long-term celestial observation across thousands of years. Not guesswork, not myth, science. But who had this science in 10,500 BC? And where did it go? Skeptics argue that alignments can be forced, that with enough imagination, any structure can be tied to stars. But the Giza-Orion match isn't vague. It's specific, it's measurable, and it's reinforced by architectural elements that support the same cosmological themes. The shafts in the King's Chamber, for example, point directly to Orion and Sirius during key epochs. The design is intentional, the symbolism encoded in stone. This wasn't decorative, it was directive. A message, perhaps, meant to survive the collapse of memory. A monument not just to the dead, but to knowledge itself. And yet, Beauval's work was met with ridicule, dismissed as pseudoscience by institutions unwilling to entertain the idea that the ancients might have possessed forgotten capabilities. But if the pyramids truly reflect the sky of a forgotten epoch, then everything changes. The Great Pyramid stops being a tomb and becomes something else, a marker, a beacon, or even a transmitter. Not for the dead, but for time. The question is no longer just who built the pyramids, but what did they want us to remember? The more closely we examine the Giza Plateau through the lens of astronomy, the more the narrative bends. This isn't the only time ancient builders encoded star patterns into stone. Across the globe, in Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat, Stonehenge, structures align with solstices, equinoxes, and specific constellations. But Giza is different. It's not seasonal, it's epochal. The Orion alignment matches the sky not during Egypt's golden age, but during the end of the last ice age. At the exact time, geological evidence suggests a global climate catastrophe reshaped the Earth. That's not symbolic. That's a timestamp. As if the pyramids were built not to commemorate the past, but to preserve it. A calendar in limestone, pointing backward, not just in time, but toward origin. Robert Beauval wasn't alone in recognizing this pattern. Independent researchers across disciplines began identifying correlations between the Sphinx, the pyramids, and long-lost constellations. The Sphinx, for example, faces due east, aligned precisely with the sunrise on the spring equinox. And in 10,500 BC, that sunrise occurred under the constellation of Leo, the lion. A lion-shaped statue aligned to Leo, built during the age of Leo. Coincidence or cosmic synchronization? This was not folklore passed down through oral tradition. It was astronomy embedded in architecture, intended to outlast language, nation, and even memory. The resistance from mainstream archaeology remains fierce. They claim the ancients lacked the mathematical tools to calculate stellar drift, known as axial precession. But such knowledge isn't magical. It's observational. Anyone tracking star positions over centuries could detect the gradual shift. All it takes is time, patience, and purpose. And apparently, the builders of Giza had all three. The question becomes, what civilization had the infrastructure to watch the skies for thousands of years, then encode what they saw into monuments meant to outlive their own disappearance? This suggests something radical. Not a primitive people grasping upward, but a sophisticated culture looking back. One that knew collapse was coming. One that carved its wisdom into stone because everything else, scrolls, cities, libraries, would not survive. The pyramids may not be tombs. They may be warnings. They may be records. They may be keys to a past we've been conditioned to forget. And in forgetting, we've become arrogant, imagining ourselves the pinnacle rather than the survivors. Modern science has made it easy to dismiss the ancients. But every block at Giza defies our timeline. Every angle mocks our assumptions. Every alignment whispers of intention. And through it all, Orion hangs above, unchanging, watching. The builders chose that constellation for a reason. Whether they saw it as a god, a guide, or a gateway, they locked it into the blueprint of Earth's most enduring structure. The Great Pyramid doesn't just point upward, it points backward, not toward heaven, but toward memory, toward a truth we buried so deep in denial, it now waits in stone. In the 1990s, another controversy erupted, this time not about stars, but about stone. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, alongside researcher John Anthony West, examined the weathering patterns on the Great Sphinx of Giza and arrived at a conclusion that defied every timeline Egyptology holds sacred. The Sphinx, they argued, wasn't eroded by wind and sand as textbooks claimed, but by water, specifically heavy rainfall. The catch? There hasn't been sustained torrential rain in that region of Egypt for over 12,000 years. Which means the Sphinx must be older than the Sahara Desert itself, older than dynastic Egypt, older than recorded civilization. If Schoch's analysis is correct, the implications are earth-shattering. It means a civilization capable of carving the world's largest monolithic statue existed at the end of the last ice age, and then disappeared. Mainstream Egyptologists pushed back hard. They claimed the erosion could be explained by wind patterns or by centuries of sandblasting. But Schoch wasn't guessing. He was reading the rock. The patterns weren't horizontal as wind would create, but vertical, deep undulating channels carved by rainfall flowing over centuries. Other geologists confirmed his assessment. The body of the Sphinx, largely protected under sand for millennia, showed clear signs of hydraulic erosion, while nearby temples built from the same limestone exhibited no such wear. It wasn't just evidence, it was comparative analysis, and it forced an uncomfortable question. If the Sphinx is over 12,000 years old, who built it? Because Khafra, the pharaoh traditionally credited with its construction, ruled around 2500 BC. That's nearly 8,000 years too late. The response from institutions wasn't scientific rebuttal, it was silence. Hawass, once again, shut down debate, calling it nonsense and accusing Schoch of seeking publicity. But Schoch had nothing to gain and everything to lose. He wasn't a fringe theorist. He was a tenured professor of geology applying his discipline to a historical structure. His conclusion didn't come from myth or guesswork. It came from stone. And the stone, as always, refused to lie. It told a story of rain, not sand, of a climate that hadn't existed in millennia, of builders who lived and vanished long before the pharaohs ever laid a brick. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was a bombshell. Because if the Sphinx is that old, it rewrites the entire timeline of Egyptian civilization. It suggests that monuments predated dynasties. That knowledge wasn't built up, but inherited. That Egypt, far from being the origin of civilization, was a restoration project, a memory, a second act. And perhaps that's why the reaction from Egyptology was so fierce. Because once you accept that the Sphinx is older than its context, everything around it, the pyramids, the temples, the myths, must be reevaluated. And history, like the sand, starts to shift. What makes the Sphinx controversy so unsettling is that the evidence doesn't rely on interpretation. It's physical, measurable, and repeatable. The weathering is there. The climate data is there. The geological timelines are there. And yet, instead of revisiting the narrative, academia doubled down. They accused Schoch of misunderstanding erosion, despite him being a geologist and his critics being historians. They mocked John Anthony West, calling him a mystic, despite his work being grounded in field observation and pattern recognition. In short, they attacked the messenger, not the message. Because the message was clear, something very old, very skilled, and now forgotten once stood on the Giza Plateau long before the pharaohs. West's theory extended beyond geology. He proposed that the Sphinx was not originally carved as a pharaoh, but as a lion, its body proportioned more like a feline than a human. The current face, he argued, was a later recarving during dynastic times, possibly by Khafra. This would explain the disproportionate head, which seems too small for the body, and the lack of consistent stylistic elements found in the other royal statues. If true, then the Sphinx is not a tribute to a ruler. It's a relic, a survivor from an epoch lost to sand and myth, a sentinel from an earlier world. And that world, according to climate data, ended around 10,500 BC, the same epoch that the Orion stars aligned perfectly over Giza. That convergence is not coincidence. It's a pattern. Geological data pointing to 10,500 BC. Astronomical alignment pointing to 10,500 BC. A statue aligned to Leo, facing the rising sun of the age of Leo, beginning in 10,500 BC. Different disciplines, same date. And yet, Egyptology insists on a 2,500 BC origin, offering no physical evidence, only tradition. But tradition is not truth. And when truth threatens tradition, it's tradition that must yield. If we accept the Sphinx as older than history allows, then we must accept the possibility of a civilization before civilization, one with knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and symbolism, far exceeding what we attribute to the Neolithic world. This doesn't require aliens. It doesn't demand fantasy. It demands humility. That maybe our ancestors weren't crude but capable. That maybe they didn't build alone, but rebuilt. That memory isn't always passed through language, but sometimes through stone. The Sphinx doesn't just guard the plateau. It guards a secret, a crack in the facade of history, too troubling for institutions to acknowledge. And so, like the Gothenbrink door, like the Muon void, it is ignored. But it doesn't go away. It weathers. It waits. And every year, as the desert wind strips another grain from its flank, the truth comes closer to the surface, not revealed by discovery, but by erosion, not spoken, but exposed. If the builders of the Great Pyramid possessed knowledge far beyond what we attribute to the ancient world, then where did that knowledge go? Civilizations don't simply forget how to engineer precision-cut granite or align monuments to celestial coordinates. Knowledge fades slowly, not instantly, unless something catastrophic happens, unless there was a break in the chain, a lost link in human history. That's exactly what alternative researchers like Graham Hancock have long argued, that an advanced global civilization once thrived during the late Ice Age, only to be wiped out by a massive cataclysm, likely a comet impact, global flooding, or abrupt climate collapse around 10,800 BC. Not a myth, not a metaphor, but an extinction-level reset. And what we call the rise of civilization was actually a reboot. Mainstream history scoffs at the idea. It insists that civilization began in Sumer, grew through Egypt, and expanded via Greece and Rome. But evidence from sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey tells another story. Constructed around 9,600 BC, Göbekli Tepe features massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in complex stone circles with astronomical alignment. It was built with no signs of agriculture, pottery, or writing, hallmarks of a civilized society. How did hunter-gatherers create such precision architecture with no tools or infrastructure? They didn't. Or rather, they inherited techniques from a culture that did. Hancock suggests that the survivors of this lost civilization passed fragments of knowledge to less advanced peoples, seeding the myths of godlike beings who brought astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. Across ancient cultures, similar stories appear. The Apkallu of Sumeria, the Viracocha of the Andes, the Nomo of the Dogon, civilizing deities who arrived after disaster, not gods, survivors, teachers, echoes of a forgotten world. The Great Pyramid, in this view, isn't a tomb. It's a transmission, a relic of warning or remembrance. Its precision, scale, and complexity weren't born in isolation. They were the final output of a lineage that began long before Egypt existed. Skeptics call this fantasy. Yet the physical evidence piles up. Megalithic blocks in Peru and Bolivia, cut and fitted with machine-like accuracy. The Osirion at Abydos, buried beneath later temples, built with monolithic granite blocks untouched by inscriptions, but shaped with impossible precision. These structures are not stylistically Egyptian. They are technically superior to later works. And that's the paradox. History, in theory, is supposed to improve. But the deeper we dig, the more refined the stonework becomes. It's as if the knowledge ran backward, as if someone started with mastery, then forgot. Cataclysm would explain that. Floods don't just drown cities, they drown memory. And when survivors rebuild, they do so with what little remains. Not just of tools, but of understanding. The idea of a lost civilization isn't new, but what makes it urgent now is the convergence of disciplines. Geology, astronomy, engineering, and mythology are all pointing to the same crack in the historical timeline. Something advanced came before. Something with tools, star maps, and an understanding of vibration and energy. The Great Pyramid may be the most visible monument of that civilization, but it is not alone. Across the planet, echoes remain. At Puma Punku in Bolivia, stones lie shattered by some violent force, their surfaces carved with geometric precision no chisel can explain. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the trilithon blocks weigh over 800 tons, impossible to move today without the most advanced cranes. Yet they were placed, stacked, leveled, and forgotten. Who did this? And why did they stop? Mainstream archaeology shrugs. It offers local labor theories, ritual motivations, and symbolic explanations. But those answers crumble under physical scrutiny. You can't move an 800-ton block without a logistical infrastructure. You can't align megaliths to the processional sky without centuries of data. You can't cut basalt with bronze and sand. And you certainly don't build structures more advanced than anything that follows, then vanish. Unless something intervened, unless the sky fell. Ancient myths from every corner of the earth describe floods, fire, darkness, and the fall of golden ages. The Zep Tepi of Egypt, the Yuga cycles of India, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, all describe cycles of creation and destruction. And in each, there is always a reset. Civilization ends. A memory is lost. A new world begins. What if we're living in that new world? And what if the pyramids, the Sphinx, the temples buried beneath more recent ruins are not monuments of origin, but warnings of what came before? A legacy carved in silence, hoping to outlive the noise. If so, then we've misunderstood everything. We've looked at the Great Pyramid and asked how it was built. But maybe the better question is, why was it left behind? Perhaps not as a tomb or a temple, but as a marker, an anchor point to be rediscovered once we were ready. Ready not just technologically, but mentally. Ready to ask dangerous questions. Ready to confront the possibility that we are not the first to rise this high. Of course, acknowledging a lost advanced civilization doesn't mean accepting fantasy. It means accepting humility. That we are not the peak, but the survivors. That progress is not a straight line. That the past may hold answers not in text, but in stone. The Great Pyramid is not whispering. It's screaming. in weight, in angle, in alignment. And still, we cover our ears. Because to hear it is to admit that history is not what we've been taught. It is deeper, older, and far more mysterious. And that mystery is not a threat. It is an invitation to dig, to listen, and above all, to remember. For all its authority, modern archaeology finds itself trapped in a paradox. It claims to search for truth, yet shudders when truth strays from its textbooks. It champions science, but recoils from anomalies that science can't explain. And nowhere is this more visible than in the ongoing investigation, or lack thereof, into the Great Pyramid. When engineers, geologists, and astronomers raise red flags, archaeology shrugs. When measurements defy logic, it calls them misinterpretations. When explorers find sealed chambers, hidden voids, or unexplained technology, the response is bureaucratic hesitation, not because the evidence is weak, but because its implications are strong. Too strong, strong enough to upend everything. Why does this resistance persist? The answer lies in institutional preservation. Egyptology, like any academic field, is built on consensus. Degrees, funding, and reputations depend on the story staying intact. Admit that Khufu didn't build the Great Pyramid, and hundreds of careers begin to crumble. Admit that an older, advanced civilization may have existed, and textbooks across the world must be rewritten. Museums must redesign exhibits. Scholars must revise their life's work. Universities must explain how they got it so wrong for so long. This isn't just a historical crisis, it's an existential one. And so they stall. They dismiss. They deflect. They wait for the noise to die down. But the stones don't die. The pyramid remains. Its angles still point to celestial truths. Its granite blocks still hum with impossible symmetry. Its hidden voids still defy access. And every year, new technologies pull back another layer of mystery. Ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, muon tomography. Each reveals more secrets and meets the same wall of silence. Requests denied, access revoked, findings buried, not by sand, by protocol. If these secrets were nonsense, the authorities would allow them to be disproven publicly. But they don't. Instead, they lock the doors. And that tells you everything. It's not about protecting Egypt. It's about protecting orthodoxy. Truth, in this context, isn't what's real. It's what's allowed. And what's allowed must conform. But the Great Pyramid does not conform. It challenges. It questions. It dares us to imagine a human past unfiltered by colonial interpretations or political pride. It suggests we are inheritors, not originators. That humanity has been here before. That we are not the first to build high or fall hard. That memory is not just written. It is measured, angled, and sealed in stone. And that the longer we ignore the questions, the higher the cost of rediscovering the answers. To understand why the truth remains buried, we have to accept an uncomfortable fact. Archaeology is not neutral. It is shaped by institutions, politics, and often nationalism. Egypt's identity, its pride, its global status, is deeply tied to its ancient past. The idea that the Great Pyramid might not be wholly Egyptian in origin is unthinkable to many. Not because the evidence is weak, but because the emotional cost is too high. For Egypt, admitting the possibility of an earlier, non-dynastic builder feels like erasing cultural ownership. For Western institutions, accepting it means acknowledging centuries of arrogance disguised as scholarship. For academia, it means risking credibility, funding, and control. So instead, everyone stalls. Not to protect the past, but to protect themselves from what the past might reveal. This isn't just theoretical. Researchers who challenge the narrative face real consequences. Permits are denied, careers are derailed, publications are rejected. Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, and others have endured years of ridicule, not for what they claim, but for daring to ask different questions. They don't demand belief, they demand inquiry. But in a system where inquiry threatens stability, the system shuts down. And so the pyramid waits. The voids remain sealed, the doors untouched, the anomalies unexplored, not because we can't investigate, but because someone, somewhere, decided we shouldn't. It's ironic. We have the tools now. Fiber optic drones, micro sensor scanners, AI-assisted modeling. We could map every chamber, decode every vibration, reconstruct every alignment. But instead of deploying these tools with urgency, we deploy bureaucracy. And behind that wall of red tape stands fear, not fear of danger, but fear of change. Fear that the story we've told for centuries might not be the whole story, that our ancestors were not primitives groping toward greatness, but inheritors of a shattered legacy. That what we call myth may be memory, that what we call coincidence may be design. And what of the cost? What do we lose by maintaining the illusion? We lose clarity. We lose wisdom. We lose the chance to learn from a civilization that may have already faced its apocalypse and left warnings in stone. If the Great Pyramid is more than a tomb, then it may be more than history. It may be instruction about resonance, energy, alignment, collapse. And if we continue to ignore those instructions, we may repeat the fall of the very builders we refuse to name. Ultimately, truth doesn't require permission. It doesn't need a consensus. It doesn't care about reputation or tenure. It sits in granite, in silence, in symmetry. It endures. And while institutions argue and archaeologists posture, the pyramid remains, unexplained, undebunked, unbroken, waiting not for belief, but for courage. The courage to look beyond dogma, the courage to open the door, the courage to admit we don't know what we thought we knew, and the courage to find out. Strip away the myth, the textbooks, the curated tours, and you're left with stone, unapologetically precise, unapologetically strange. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands not as a tomb, but as a contradiction. Its construction defies Bronze Age capability. Its purpose eludes funerary logic. Its alignment to cardinal points borders on perfection. Its internal chambers resist symbolic explanation. Its secrets are sealed not just behind stone, but behind silence. And for centuries, we've accepted this silence as part of the mystery. But what if it's not mystery we're looking at, but concealment? What if this monument isn't misunderstood, but misrepresented? Not forgotten, but intentionally misread. We've asked who built it. We've asked how they moved the stones, how they cut the granite, how they saw without light. We've debated star maps, erosion, voids, doors. But perhaps the most important question is, why is no one allowed to finish the investigation? Why, in the era of deep space telescopes and quantum processors, can't we get permission to send a probe behind a door? Why are chambers scanned and mapped, but never entered? Why are measurements collected, then ignored? The mystery isn't just ancient. It's current, it's living, and it speaks not just to the past, but to the present structures of control, narrative, and intellectual fear. Every anomaly tells a story. The missing body of Khufu, the copper-handled door, the sootless ceilings, the erosion of the Sphinx, the Orion alignment, the seismic void above the Grand Gallery. Each one alone is a riddle. Together, they are a thesis, a message written in evidence, pointing to a version of history we have not yet dared to accept. A version in which knowledge was not a linear climb, but a cycle, where technology was not discovered, but recovered, where civilization didn't start in Mesopotamia, but rebooted there, after something fell, something big enough to erase memory, to level cities, to bury libraries and leave only stone behind. And the pyramid? It endured, because it was meant to. It wasn't just built to house the dead. It was built to survive the forgetting, to wait. And now, thousands of years later, we stand at its threshold, still unsure whether to turn the key, still arguing over whether the lock even matters, still bound to narratives that tremble in the presence of stone. But truth is not afraid. It doesn't hide. It doesn't need defending. It stands, like the pyramid, silent, unmoving, undeniable. And in that silence, it waits for us not to believe, but to look. Imagine if we stopped protecting the past and started investigating it, without agenda, without nationalism, without fear. Imagine if we opened the sealed void above the Grand Gallery, if we sent cameras behind the second Gantenbrink door, if we drilled beneath the Sphinx's paws, where seismic scans suggest the presence of chambers never explored. Imagine what we might find. Not aliens, not magic, just evidence. Unfiltered, uncurated, unapproved. Evidence that could confirm what many already suspect. That the Great Pyramid was not the product of a tomb-building culture, but the artifact of a legacy we have not yet acknowledged. Relic not of Egypt's known dynasties, but of a forgotten epoch, buried not by time, but by design. And maybe that's why the fear runs so deep. Because some truths, once uncovered, cannot be reburied. They demand uncomfortable reckonings with science, with identity, with power. Because if we admit that the Great Pyramid is older than history says, or built with technology we no longer possess, then we have to admit we're not at the top of the pyramid. We're somewhere in the middle, and that changes everything. It means history is not a line, it's a spiral. It means knowledge can be lost, civilizations can fall, and arrogance can blind even the most educated. It means the ancients weren't stumbling into brilliance. They were trying to preserve it. For us. But that window is closing. The sands reclaim the truth faster than we pursue it. Politics tighten their grip. Institutions entrench. Gatekeepers double down. And yet, the evidence grows. With every scan, every anomaly, every stone we refuse to explain, the pyramid has already spoken. It has whispered through geometry, weight, magnetism, acoustics, and alignment. It has waded through floods, empires, and centuries of silence. It has outlived those who claim to explain it. And now, it watches us, armed with tools the ancients never had, but courage they may have possessed in greater measure. They built. We hesitate. In the end, the pyramid is not just a mystery to solve. It's a mirror. It reflects our willingness to question, to unlearn, to confront. And perhaps that's the final test. Not to decode its secrets, but to admit we buried them, that we feared what we might find, that the truth was never lost, it was locked away. And all we had to do was ask the one question no one in power ever wants you to ask. What if we've been wrong? Not just about who built the Great Pyramid, but about who we are and what came before us.